Hi, it's Robin. It's 2022, and that marks the 40th anniversary of the famous Commodore 64 computer. Here's what's called a silver label Commodore 64 that was actually made in 1982. It gets its name from the silver Commodore badge up here and the silver 64 near the power LED. Silver label C64s are actually quite rare. Here's a later model C64 with the much more famous rainbow badge, gleam, and also the different little badge near the power LED. They are the same size though. Camera tricks. But in 1982, Commodore was actually making another computer, actually more of a hybrid games console and computer that shares a lot in common with the C64. It has the same 6510 processor. It has the same sound SID chip. It even has the same VIC-II video chip. And that is, right here, the Commodore MAX, or Commodore MAX machine. So, bye-bye silver label. We'll talk about you later. So the Commodore MAX design started in 1981, before the Commodore 64 was conceived, according to Brian Bagnall's excellent book, On the Edge. The custom chips, the VIC-II and the SID, had already been designed, but they weren't being used in a system yet. Commodore Japan engineer Yashi Terakira, who had worked on the VIC-20, then moved to Commodore USA. And once there, he started to design a games console using the VIC and the SID, which he called the Ultimax. Then Commodore decided they wanted to make a successor to the VIC-20 using the same chipset as the MAX. So they decided to make it compatible with the Ultimax so that they could use the same cartridge games that were already being developed for the Ultimax. So the Ultimax eventually became the MAX, and the other project, the successor to the VIC-20, became the Commodore 64. And both were released in 1982. But of course, the MAX remained very obscure, and the Commodore 64 went on to become extremely successful. But the Ultimax definitely had influence on the design of the Commodore 64, and later on we'll look at some evidence that shows that the Commodore 64 influenced the design of the Ultimax. Certainly there was a bit of cross-pollination going on, and the Commodore 64 owes at least a bit of its design to this system. Now this system went through many names in the short time from when it was conceived to when it was released. In the UK, it was called the VIC-10 for a short time, as shown in my episode about the vaporware VIC-30 as part of a complete VIC line, which at one time also had a machine called the VIC-40, which became the Commodore 64. So the naming of VIC-10 indicated that this was going to be at the bottom of the Commodore 8-bit line, even below the VIC-20. In Germany, it was known as the VC-10 to parallel the already released VC-20 there. That is the VIC-20, but apparently VIC sounds too much like a rude word in German, so it was renamed VC. Here's a German advertisement for the Commodore VC-10, which was supposed to be available in October 1982, at a price of 498 Deutschmarks. I think those are Deutschmarks anyway. Here in Canada and the USA, it was originally known as the Ultimax. This particular name is immortalized in the C64 Programmer's Reference Guide, which mentions it multiple times, such as here on page 267, the Ultimax memory map. But a pamphlet from Commodore USA calls it the Commodore MAX machine, so they had changed the name in the US as well as they were nearing release. And in Japan, it also went from Ultimax ultimately being called the Commodore MAX machine, or sometimes just the Commodore MAX. So as far as we know, the MAX was only released in Japan, and that's where I got this one from. but it really was very close to release in other parts of the world. Commodore USA Marketing produced a large full-color pamphlet for the machine, which fortunately has been scanned and is available on archive.org. The front page of it proclaims that the Commodore MAX is a third-generation game machine. Page 3, introducing the Commodore MAX machine. From here on, all video games can be divided into two categories, the Commodore MAX machine and all the others. What's so special about the Commodore MAX? It makes claims of it being a true computer, an ultimate game machine. It's a music synthesizer. And all this for under $200. Page 5 compares the Commodore MAX against the Atari VCS and the Intellivision. And of course, every option on the Commodore MAX says yes, while the Atari VCS and Intellivision have plenty of no's there, such as light pen, no, keyboard, no, programmable, no, cassette storage, no, hi-fi audio output, no, Commodore MAX, yes. It also has quite a few mock screenshots, including the never-released Spiders of Mars. Page 9 shows how to get your kids to hang out at home with pictures of the original Commodore controllers that are a complete ripoff of the Atari controllers. And page 16 talks about how MAX cartridges are compatible with the Commodore 64 in case you want to upgrade later. So now this is a surprising amount of marketing hype even for Commodore, and some of the info in this pamphlet is misleading or even flat out wrong. We'll look at that again later once we've got a better sense of what the MAX actually can do. So let's take a look at the actual unit and comparing it to the Commodore 64. So on the right-hand side of the Commodore 64, you have the control ports, 1 and 2, the power switch, and the power socket. While on the Commodore MAX, they've tucked one joystick port over here on the left, and the other one here on the right. And they've swung the power switch and power socket over to the back on the MAX, and added, interestingly, a 3.5 millimeter jack for audio output. The next section here matches up pretty close. They both have the same expansion port, also known as the cartridge port. And as mentioned, two systems can share some cartridges. More or less all Ultimax cartridges will run fine on the Commodore 64, but many Commodore 64 cartridges will not run on the Ultimax. We'll talk about that more later. And also lining up are the channel select switch and the RF output. This NTSC C64 selects between channel 2 and 3, while the Japanese channel select is between channel 1 and 2. Japan has a different broadcast standard. In North America, you can tune that in on channel 95 or 96 if your tuner supports that. The tuner in my JVC VCR does support channels that high. Okay, we're already reaching the end of the ports on the MAX, and this is where the Commodore 64 has a lot more to it. The audio-visual port, the AV port, which is 5-pin on this old silver label Commodore 64. Later that was upgraded to an 8-pin on later model Commodore 64s, and the serial or IEC port to which disk drives and printers hook up on the Commodore 64, also absent on the MAX. Now the MAX does have a cassette port, and it is compatible with the Commodore 64 cassette port. And finally, the Commodore 64 has a user port, most often used to hook up a modem, and that's also absent from the MAX. And my silver label started its life at the Sphere Computer Literacy Center in Burnaby, BC. Hello, Burnaby. So the MAX does not have a composite video out, but there is an interesting and fairly easy mod that I have not done, but Jan Beta demonstrated on his channel. I'll put a link in the video description that allows you to run a composite video out of this audio port. And it does seem like a pretty good solution, but I'm a bit hesitant to try that on mine. The RF output is decent for me. And here is the power supply. And you might notice that the input is 100 volts, 50 hertz. That's what they use in Japan, or at least I think in half of Japan. Here on the back, the power supply was made in the 44th week of 1982 in Singapore. It's actually fairly rounded, like it's swelling up. So I am definitely not going to use that power supply. But fortunately, that's the same power connector that the Commodore 64 uses, so I can just use my heavy-duty power supply that I use all the time on my 64. And that will keep this rare Max much safer. Gotta be careful of those old power supply bricks. And let's look at the keyboard here. You can see it's just a nearly flat membrane keyboard. The keys are a bit rounded and have a little bit of feedback to them. So it's better than some keyboards, like the one on my Timex Sinclair 1000 or the ZX81, which is just completely flat and gives no feedback at all. I do prefer this, but this is still a pretty terrible keyboard to actually use. This computer was definitely designed to be significantly cheaper than the Commodore 64 and even the VIC-20. But I really do like the look of membrane keyboards. I think this is a really awesome looking keyboard. So those of you familiar with the Commodore 64 keyboard will probably notice that the layout of the Max is basically identical, except in membrane form. It actually even has more in common with the much later 64C keyboard. See, these later Commodore 64 keyboards don't have printing on the front of the keys. All the printing is just on the top. That allowed them to make these keyboards a little bit cheaper. And that same approach was used years earlier here on the Commodore MAX, such as the graphic characters here, although it's above the letters on the MAX and below on the 64C. There's a few other quirks about the keyboard. One really funny thing is this key, the shift lock. On a real Commodore 64, shift lock is an actual locking key. Well, of course, on a membrane keyboard, you can't make it locking. But what's hilarious is that it actually doesn't even lock in software. It's not even like a toggle when you're in BASIC. It is just another shift key with identical function to just a regular shift key. I find that really funny, actually. Shift lock. Nope. Another interesting one is the space bar. It is the one key that does not press down at all. It does not have like a little dome or bubble. It is just this straight bar. It kind of has this funny zigzaggy kind of pattern to it. It's kind of subtle, but I actually don't know how that works, if that's just a design. But anyway, the spacebar gives no feedback. You just push it, and it does work. But maybe it uses capacitance, or I don't know. The function keys are a little bit odd. Of course, on most keyboards, whatever's at the bottom of the key, such as the letter M or the number 9, is what you get when you just press the key unshifted. And then if you hold down shift, you get the symbol above it, such as the right parenthesis for you Americans, or right round bracket. And that's true throughout the keyboard, and presumably why they put the graphic characters above the letters as well. You hold down Shift or Commodore to get the graphic symbols at the top. They've got that backwards on the function keys, where if you press the key unshifted, you should get F1, but that's actually at the top. And then if you shift, you get F2. But perhaps it's just too disturbing to them visually to have F2, F1, F4, F3, and so on. It does look like they struggled with that a bit on this Commodore 64 personal computer, the 64C, and put F1 up in the top left and F2 in the bottom right to, I don't know. And actually, this keyboard already kind of violates that by having the letters above the symbols. Whatever, right? In that Commodore USA Max Machine Flyer we were looking at, They have a fairly good close-up of the USA version of the machine. Just a couple amusing things there. While the Japanese production model has the graphic characters on the key, the USA version, or at least this prototype, doesn't have the graphics characters at all. And while on the Japanese machine, the 0 is the same size and in line with all the other number keys, just like on a regular Commodore 64, the US version has this extra big 0 right in the middle of the key. That's actually the same thing that was done on the recent the C64 full-size, or Maxi. It has that same big centered 0 on the key. That looks pretty weird to me. Maybe they got the idea from the American MAX machine. But probably the funniest one to me is that on this prototype or mock-up, they've reversed cursor right and left. Normally when you press that key, it's cursor right, and then if you shift, it's cursor left. And as if Commodore cursor keys aren't already confusing enough, on this prototype, cursor left is the default or lower position, and you need to shift to get to cursor right. I love dumb stuff like this. Okay, now let's open up the Max and take a look inside and compare it to the Silver Label Commodore 64, both these motherboards produced in 1982. There's a 70s towel, thanks to Richard Pepper again. And hello to Adrian Black. And fans. Okay, so the Max has 5 screws on the bottom, so we'll just remove those. It is interesting that the Commodore model number is MAX 04. I'm not sure how they came up with that 04 model name. It was made in Japan. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, there's always one that won't come out. There we go, and 5. Okay, and the keyboard, it's one of these ribbon cables, so we will gently pull that out. It's interesting that the inside of the keyboard does have this heavy piece of metal there. It does give it some heft. And the VIC chip is under in one of these cans. It's got that little heat-sinky kind of thing to push down to the VIC chip. Okay, there it is. So we'll just go through the components. Okay, the motherboard here says it's board 325565 revision A. And I believe Dave McCurdy's of the Commodore International Historical Society, he's got a revision B board. So I don't really know what the difference is. But it's interesting that they did go through at least one other board revision. And here's the much bigger board of the Silver Label C64. And here it's assembly, was that 326298, revision A, copyright 1982, Commodore 64, it says there. Okay, we'll compare some of the chips here, because there is a lot in common between these two systems, although the motherboard layout is quite different. So Max on the left and Commodore 64 Silver Label on the right. So the MOS 6510 says CBM at the end. It's a date code of 2882, 28th week of 1982. And here, the 6510 processor is the 2982. So these are made just 1 week apart. So I find that pretty incredible. So that's late May or early June of 1982. Okay, and the SID 6581 is 2282 in the Max and 2382 in the C64. Again, just a week apart, with the Max one being a week newer. Next, we've got the video chip, and we can see that they're really on the opposite ends of the board here, each in their own little kind of metal can. I'll probably have to bring this closer to the camera. So in the C64, it has a 6567 R5 6A from the 41st week of 82. That's an NTSC VIC-II. That's actually the 64 cycle model, meaning there's 64 cycles across a video scan line, unlike all later NTSC VIC-IIs that have 65 cycle. And here in the Max, we have a 6566 VIC chip, VIC-II, from the 36th week of 82, 5 weeks earlier. And this 6566 is super rare. It has all the same graphic capabilities as the VIC-II in the Commodore 64, but it doesn't have the DRAM refresh circuitry that's in the Commodore 64 one. It expects SRAM instead. But that model number is referenced in the Commodore 64 program's reference guide many times. There we go, those awesome MOS markings there. So those really are the heart of a Commodore 64, the 6510 processor, the VIC-II video chip, and the SID. And those are shared in both systems. Next is the color RAM. This wee little guy here, an MM2114N3L. The 2114 is the important part. And that is a 4x1024 NMOS static RAM. Color RAM is 1024 nibbles, 4-bit memory, and it's static even on a Commodore 64 rather than the DRAM. And here on the Max is an MSM2114L3R. Again, that's color RAM. So that's in common too, both 2114s. Okay, and now we start diverging. Here on the 64, we have the 6526. This is called the CIA chip. It's the input-output chip. And you'll see that we have two of them here, 6526, 14 weeks apart. They must all just been thrown in a bin and they just grabbed whatever was there. So on the C64, one of them handles the keyboard, the joystick, the dataset timing, while the other one handles the user port and disk drive. On the Max, there is only one 6526. And that's the one that reads the keyboard, the joysticks, and handles the tape timing. They didn't have to put a second CIA in because the Max is lacking the user port and disk drive that are driven by the second CIA. So there's one cost-cutting measure. And here's where it gets really serious. On the C64, we have 3 ROMs, which hold the basic programming language, the kernel operating system, and the character ROM, the bitmaps for the characters that we see on the screen when you power up the Commodore 64. While on the Max, they are just not there, no ROM at all. That means it is useless without a cartridge installed. If you want BASIC, you have to put a cartridge in. If you want any kind of operating system, you must put a cartridge in. So that's a huge cost savings, but it has kind of funny implications. For example, that cassette port is absolutely useless unless the cartridge has all the code to support it. And it's actually a lot of code to support the Commodore cassette protocol. And of course, that's built into Commodore 64, VIC-20, PET, and so on. But here, that cassette port is completely useless. And for any game to actually support it, they would have to code that routine. I don't know, would Commodore even make that available to third-party developers? You'd hope so, but that code was kind of a mess. It was written by Chuck Peddle in in a mad fit of undocumented code, and nobody could ever figure out exactly how it worked again. Okay, and the other huge area is these chips down here, which are M5K 6164 NS20s. Again, the important part is the 6164. That is the 64K of RAM that gave the Commodore 64 its name. In 1982, 64K was an enormous amount of RAM for a home computer. And these are dynamic RAM, which means that they need to be refreshed. And part of the cost savings was that the VIC chip actually drives the refresh circuitry, allowing this much cheaper dynamic RAM to be used. And of course, the Max was not about to have 64K. Apparently, there were arguments between the engineers. The programmers wanted 8K of RAM in the system so it could at least show a bitmap. Another group thought it should only have 4K of RAM. Jack Tramiel supposedly walked in and said, "Why not 6?" Making nobody happy. And in the end, somehow, it ended up with 2K of RAM. And that's this chip here, the M58725P. So apparently that's 2K of static RAM. And the final major chip here is the PLA, and I don't know exactly the story here, but mine has been replaced with this C64 Rev 3 8411. I believe that's the replacement PLA. I don't know if the old one just broke or if there was a bug in an earlier one or whatever. And that chip controls all the different memory configurations and routing of data. That's kind of the magic that allows the Commodore 64 to be compatible with the Ultimax, and also to have both 64K of RAM and 20K of ROM all in one system. And on the Max, it has, I believe the equivalent is this 6703. I really don't know much about this chip, but I believe it performs at least some of the functions of the PLA in a Commodore 64. If anybody knows more, then I'd be interested in hearing that. Okay, so that's a comparison between the Max and the original Commodore 64. And you can see that they definitely cut a lot of corners here in an attempt to bring down the cost of this Max machine. Okay, now that we've had a look all around the Max, inside the Max, finally, let's try using it for its main purpose, that is playing games. Okay, I've got the Max hooked up, power, RF output, and a joystick plugged in. Power switch here. Now, I haven't plugged a cartridge in. I want to show you what this does. Power up. Okay. So, yeah, the Max does absolutely nothing without a cartridge inserted. No built-in BASIC, no operating system at all, nothing. That really detracts from the system, in my opinion, and makes even the VIC-II a better item. But anyway, BASIC was available for it. We'll get to that later. Okay. Power it off again. And that is like a lot of the game consoles of the time, at least the Atari 2600, it did nothing at all unless you had a cartridge plugged in. But the Atari 2600 didn't bill itself as a computer. Oh, Atari Video Computer System. Well, I guess it did, but still. I've got a collection of Max machine cartridges, and they are Commodore 64 cartridges, and they will work on Commodore 64, but they're special Ultimax cartridges that the Commodore 64 detects and adapts to. All right, so here we go. Plug in the cartridge and hope it still works. Yes. Okay, so this is Super Alien or Alien. Okay, so you're that wee little character at the bottom. And you dig holes. It's kind of like a cross between, what is it, Apple Panic or something? There's other digging games. I suppose there's Lode Runner as well. And if the monster falls in the hole, or the alien... Come on! Oh! Okay, I think you can only dig to the left of yourself. That's kind of weird. Okay, there, now we'll fill it. There, we got one. Okay, you get the idea. And Commodore violated some of its own kind of design principles here. See how hard some of this is to see? It's because it's using single pixel width characters, and those just do not show up. It's just a general design principle for Commodore graphics that you don't do single pixel width lines because they just aren't very visible. You can see some modern games are starting to bring that back again. That's because they're only developing on like emulators or HDMI machines or something. So yeah, to fill you have to hold down the fire button and... Right. Oh, he got me. That's enough Super Alien. So I've got a couple cartridges that are still boxed. See here, it does say Max Machine, item number Max 3502. That artwork is great, but it has nothing to do with the game. because this game is... Oh, I can't read Japanese, but I think that's 1,000 yen. That's sold for. Well, here we go. Jupiter Lander. And there's the back of the box. It's kind of got that graph paper motif that what the Sega Master System used on their boxes later. Made in Japan. Kind of neat to see a Japanese take on a Commodore product like that. So we'll open that up. That's inside the box. And the cartridge comes in this cardboard insert. I'll plug Jupiter Lander in there. And here's the manual for it. It's a screenshot. I can't read any of that. So those are the instructions. It shows to use the keyboard, or you can use joystick. Jupiter Lander, and this seems to be the same as the Commodore 64 version. Plays that music. Apparently that's ripped off from Terra Cresta, another arcade game. Oh, these landings. $2,600. So the idea is you gotta make a good landing by getting that little needle in the yellow zone on that right velocity screen, the meters per second. And then you get a multiplier. This one you get 5. Oh, that was less. And then the more points you get, the more fuel you get. Or refuels. I'll try and get into that 10 times one. So this really does show off the huge sprites. I like... oh boy. I can't talk and play video games at the same time. I like how it does the zoomed in mode when you get close. Showing off the sprite expansion. Oh! The closer you are to the bottom of that yellow zone, the less points you get, but still the multiplier of 10 helps. Alright, that's Jupiter Lander. Here's another box game. Mole Attack, which is like an unofficial, well, like a video game version of Whack-A-Mole. Cartridge is still even in its plastic. Okay, Whack-A-Mole. So I want to show you this one because, kind of bizarrely, it doesn't even have joystick support. A games console cartridge that makes you play with the keyboard. And it seems to me that with only 9 directions, they could have made this use the joystick. Well, the idea is you gotta whack them by pressing the keys on the keyboard. And this is hard enough on a Commodore 64 keyboard, never mind on a membrane keyboard, but I'll give it a try. Press F1 to start. And you gotta whack the moles who are head up. They're T. Oh, this is hard. Yeah, it's really hard to find those keys, especially bottom row. So anyway, it shows the letter you have to press under each hole. Oh, I just got -5 points there. Okay, so you gotta whack the moles on the head. Whacking them in the bottom, you get minus points for them. And the closer the moles are to sticking their head in the hole, the more the points you get are. You have to get to 150 points to to get bonus points. Sorry, to get bonus time. This is really hard to play and talk at the same time. Oh. So this game is easiest on a 64C. Actually, I found it didn't work on some 64Cs. That's something I'm going to investigate later. Okay, 83 points. Not so great. But this particular game is a Commodore MAX exclusive. Never was released on the Commodore 64, although I see some hackers, after Mayhem dumped his MAX cartridge, then I saw some, hacker guys, cracker guys, released this for Commodore 64. Like, basically the game will work, but there is something odd about this game I'm going to investigate, and maybe I'll make a video about in the future. Yeah, another MAX exclusive is bowling. Actually, I really like this one. Okay, press F1 to start. I don't know if this one works with the fire button. Yeah, I guess it does. Okay, so your bowler there in the bottom left, I don't know why, but he's always sitting down. And then there he goes. Okay. Oh. Got 8 of the pins. So basically it's just a single fire button. You can put some spin on it by pressing the button while the ball, or while that little arrow is going left and right. Good game for kids, actually. So you see how that little, I don't know what to call it, that bar swings left and right. So while he's sitting down, he's already deciding how much spin he puts on it. And then he runs up from the left across and then throws the ball down the lane. It's all a little bit weird, but actually it's really fun. Spin that to the right a little. There, another spare. So this is a bowler that is obsessed with sitting down. Oh. He's got really squeaky shoes. I'm gonna spin that to the left a little. There. Another spare. I won't get a strike though. Yes. There we go. Yeah, it keeps track of all the scoring for you, of course. There. So that's bowling. As far as I know, another Ultimax exclusive. Though I wouldn't be surprised if somebody got it working on a Commodore 64. Here's Kickman. And that Kickman font there, I think is different. That like title screen, I think that's different than the Commodore 64 version. The game's really similar, but it just seems a little different. Whoops. Okay, so this game, the goal is to pop all the balloons. Or sometimes to catch them. And then on later levels, these Pac-Mans show up. I actually played a lot of this when I was young. At least of the C64 version. So you can see how like the games aren't great. In a way, it obviously is a lot nicer or a lot better graphics than like an Atari 2600 for most purposes. Like that background is more advanced. So if that's really what it was competing with. And 1982, like the ColecoVision was just coming out, wasn't it? Well, here we go with those Pac-Mans. So here now we actually catch the balloons. And you have to kick up the balloons if you can't reach it in time. Oh, no. And you fall if you can't. I just want to show what happens when you get the Pac-Man to fall down. There we go. Eat those balloons, Pac-Man. I guess Pac-Man was allowed to appear in here because of the same company behind it. There, I got two Pac-Mans on my head now. It's such a bizarre idea. And then the next level, there's some ghosts appeared too. Alright, that's enough Kickman. I think his Wizard of War on the Commodore 64 is a real favorite for a lot of people, but this Max version is terrible by comparison. The graphics are just so much worse. like look how horrible those sprites are. I don't really understand how this happened, but anyway, we can be glad that the C64 version was so much improved. Oh, I'm terrible at this. Actually, it seems a lot harder too. But those really are among the worst looking Commodore 64 sprites ever made in a commercial game. Well, this is a Max game, but still. Like for the monster, well, for everybody. They're just horrible. Those are horrible sprites. Like, I could do better. There, finally. Oh, that guy. Oh, man. Oh. Okay. That's the bad Wizard of War. Music machine. Music machine, music machine. I have no idea. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Here's Music Maker. I showed this in that recent video. Hit a Key. Hit a Key by John Fagans and Andy Finkel, August 18th, 82. So while a lot of these games were made in Japan, this one was made by Commodore USA. Well, it's not a game, but utility. Music composer or music maker. And Road Race is the last one I have. Guess it automatically shifts gears here. Oh, crash. I think this is a port of the VIC-II game. It automatically brakes if you let go fire button to brake. No, fire button to accelerate and let go to the brake can automatically slow down. Oh. You gotta go 5 kilometers to get bonus time? Well, the hood of the car looks nice anyway. There, I did over 1 kilometer. And incidentally, Pete Riddich has an excellent website about all the different variations of Ultimax games that he's found, so I'll put a link in the video description for that too. Okay, that's the first part of our look at the Commodore MAX machine. There's still a lot more to explore on this. Next time, we'll take a look at programming the MAX with the Mini Basic 1 and Max Basic cartridges. We'll take a look at the software developers kit, really just some papers, for the MAX, and some other aspects of it. Hey, thanks to my patrons for their support. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.